discuss our hurricane preparedness plans. Meetings such as this are important to us to guide our preparedness efforts, particularly given the impacts to our citizens over the last couple of years with the disasters that we faced. We've got a great team. I want to thank all of our partners that are here today and their teams have been participating in our discussions, and thank them for all the service and commitment they have to the people of Louisiana. Finally, I want to point out that there is a severe weather risk, particularly for tomorrow in northwest Louisiana. Tomorrow mid-morning through the evening tomorrow, the potential for damaging winds, hail, as well as potential for some isolated tornadoes and flooding. Wanted to make all of our citizens aware of that and appreciate you helping us to get that message out. And it reminds us all that we need to have a game plan, not just for hurricane season, but for every day. And we'd encourage everybody to go to getagameplan.org to learn more about that. It's my privilege at this point to hand it over to Governor Edwards for his remarks. Governor.
Casey, thank you, and thank y'all for being here today. I want to start by acknowledging that today is National Interpreter Appreciation Day, and so we appreciate our interpreters. They do a tremendous job working with us on all of our press conferences to make sure that everybody out there has an opportunity to get the information that we are putting out. And it's very important on days like today when we're talking about hurricane season, which is right around the corner. It'll be here in less than a month. So thank you for being here. Obviously, I'm joined by numerous members of my cabinet, as well as Ben Schott of the National Weather Service in New Orleans. Some of these individuals will be speaking to you in a moment. And I'm certain that if you're like me, it's not really exciting to be thinking about, much less talking about, another hurricane season. And that is especially the case here in Louisiana, while so many of our citizens are still recovering from back-to-back devastating hurricane seasons and the impacts it's had on homes and businesses and communities across South Louisiana. But as we know from experience, in fact, I would say too much experience, preparation is the key. We obviously can't control what the weather does, but we do control to a very large degree how we prepare, respond, and recover from natural disasters. Every year, we as a state review our storm preparation practices, and we run exercises to ensure that those plans are solid. In the past 2 years, as Casey just mentioned, we actually did more than that because we had 5 hurricanes make landfall in Louisiana, each of which required us to prepare for those hurricanes, to respond to them, and 3 of them in particular required a lot of recovery that is still ongoing. But every family, every individual, every business, you play a role in this as well. And what I'm encouraging people to do is don't leave it up to the state, because quite frankly, we can't go out and make sure that you have your supplies on hand, that your plan is formulated, that you know what to do in the event of a natural disaster. So your preparation is just as important, and in fact, I would say more important than what the state does to prepare for hurricane season. We've had a lot of hurricanes recently, as we've detailed already, and so I think some people say, well, I don't need to worry about preparing this year because I'll just do what I did last year. Well, that doesn't work for a number of reasons. Every storm is different, and people's situations are different, especially if you are still recovering from one of the previous natural disasters. Your circumstances are different. Families move, babies are born, pets are acquired, supplies run out, they need to be replenished. And we all know that there are still many families across South Louisiana struggling to rebuild after the last 2 hurricane seasons. And it's hard for those people who are not back in their homes to think about this next hurricane season. But their circumstances are different. Maybe they've got a blue roof on their house still, or maybe they don't have a roof at all and they're in a travel trailer. We've got families that are out there living with relatives and with friends. We have families that are still in hotel rooms. So it's unfair, perhaps, that we have to prepare and get ready, but we have to prepare and get ready. I happen to think it's more important than ever that we be prepared. It really is the only way we get through this with minimal disruption and damage to our state should we have another natural disaster. And for the third year in a row, we are entering hurricane season while COVID-19 remains a real threat to individuals and to families, especially in the event that we have to do congregate sheltering. So COVID is still a factor, even though we are doing much, much better than we have at any point in the pandemic to now. Everyone should know that most of the experts are predicting a summer surge. We are actually seeing an increase in cases now. Very fortunately, we're not seeing yet an increase in hospitalizations. We hope and pray that we don't. We're not seeing an increase in deaths, and we're hoping and praying that we don't, although I'm still waiting for the very first day since March of 2020 when I get a report from the Department of Health telling me that we've had none. That hasn't happened. In fact, I got the report on the way in here just a few minutes ago, and we're reporting 2 additional deaths today. But I can tell you what we can do is we can make sure that we're as prepared as possible, which means being vaccinated. And forget that term, being fully vaccinated. You just have to be up to date now, because we know the protection you get, whether it is from an actual case of COVID or from a vaccination, that protection does wane over time, and it appears that natural immunity from COVID actually wanes faster than the vaccination. So today, I will be getting my 4th shot, my 2nd booster, which is recommended for anyone 50 or older once you get 3 months past your first booster shot. And so I don't know how long this is going to continue, but from now on, you're going to hear us talking in terms of staying up to date with your shots and not being fully vaccinated. I know that we're going to hear from Marquita Walters, who is the Secretary of the Department of Children and Family Services, in just a moment. She's going to discuss sheltering. The Secretary, Dr. Sean Wilson of the Department of Transportation and Development, has some information for you on roads. Fire Marshal Butch Browning will be discussing generator safety. And we learned a hard lesson last year. We always thought that was just the generators that people hook up in when there's an emergency, the portable generators. We actually found out there was carbon monoxide poisoning in some instances for professionally installed standby generators that were too close to people's homes. And so asking people to please pay attention to his briefing today, and part of your hurricane preparations, making sure that if you have one of those generators, that it is properly installed and far enough away from vents and doors and windows and stuff to make sure that you and your family is safe. And I'll remind you, in just about every storm that we've had of late, we lose more people. More people are killed because of carbon monoxide poisoning, because of heat exhaustion, because they fall off a roof, that sort of thing, rather than the immediate impacts of the storm. But far and away, the leading cause of death in recovery has been generator safety, or the lack thereof. So please listen to what all these people have to say. I do encourage everyone to go to getagameplan.org. It will remind you of things that you probably haven't thought of, things that you now have. I think it's 28 days before hurricane season starts to make sure that you have in place, whether it's a plan or whether it's food or whether it's batteries, or whether it's a radio, you name it. So at this point, I'm going to be followed by Ben from the National Weather Service, who has some information on the forecast for hurricane season and what we can expect to experience here in Louisiana. Once all the speakers finish, then we'll come up and take a few questions should you have them. One thing that before Ben comes up, and he and I discussed this earlier today, that I want to remind people of is that of those 5 hurricanes in the last 2 seasons, 4 of them were not hurricanes that we tracked across the Atlantic and had plenty of time to prepare for. They actually popped up for the first time as a disorganized weather system, a wave, whatever they were calling it, around the Yucatan Peninsula. Then they come into the Gulf, organize and strengthen rapidly while they're at our doorstep. And when by the time they are forecasted to make landfall as a very strong hurricane, there is precious little time left for us to do all the things that we typically would want to do to prepare for landfall of a hurricane, but also for you and your families to prepare. And it appears that this is going to be the norm going forward. And in fact, the 2 strongest hurricanes to ever hit our state, ever, Laura in 2020, Ida in 2021, both were storms that developed in this manner. And so we have to be prepared and understand that we're not going to have as long to get prepared once that storm actually forms and is headed our way. This is the new normal. So with that, and to further expound on what we can expect from hurricane season, Ben, would you please come up?
Hello, my name is Benjamin Schott. I'm the meteorologist in charge of the National Weather Service office in New Orleans. And I'll start off a little bit discussing the upcoming forecast for the hurricane season in 2022. You can see the graphic that I have posted up here, and just to kind of go over some of the basics there, it will definitely be an above normal season. A lot of the same environmental setup that was there in 2020 and 2021 is in place again this year. That is mostly driven by La Nina, which is a cooling of the ocean waters near the equator on the western side of South America. You say, how does that affect us here? That has global impacts when it comes with the way the jet stream works, the way storms form, how it affects global sea surface temperatures. So it sets things up perfectly for, unfortunately, another active season to be ahead in 2022. The numbers that you see there are from some very well-regarded researchers at Colorado State University. NOAA's forecast for the tropical season will be coming out a little bit later this month. But I don't believe that there'll be anything much different from what you're seeing from the Colorado State numbers to really separate them greatly in any detail. So the big thing that I want to, everyone to take away from the above average forecast, which is something that we've seen again the last 2 years, in the end, though, there could still be 10, 20, how many storms end up forming. As we've all unfortunately experienced over the last 2 years, it just takes one. It takes one to change our lives. It takes one to change everything that we know and create a lot of problems for us. So we need to prepare for the upcoming season with that idea that it just takes one, even though the forecast does show a very active season. And it just takes one Laura, one Zeta, one Delta, one Ida, and we can have horrific impacts across the area. Some other things, you know, every storm is on its own kind of destructive beast. They all have its own characteristics. A lot of times when you see like the forecast here and it says there could be 4 major hurricanes with maybe the assumption that one could be at least in the Gulf of Mexico, we have to understand the threats with these storms. So as we prepare and we think about the upcoming season, I want to reiterate something that I usually mention in every one of these briefings as we do have something approaching the coast, is to know the threats. You know, they're all different, to not focus in on just the category as we start the season of these storms. They all can have significant threats, whether it be from wind or surge or from flooding from heavy rains. And so I just want to make sure that I reiterate that as we move forward. As the governor mentioned, we've had a lot of these with this rapid intensification, really shortening the window. And if you focus on the category, maybe 3 days out, you may make decisions that 24 hours later end up being poorer decisions than you would have made because of the rapid intensification that we've seen over the last couple of years as storms approach the coast. So this is something that, as we prepare for this season, we need to keep in the back of our minds. And that plan and prep starts now, as the governor mentioned. So at the National Weather Service, especially here in our office in New Orleans and all along the Gulf Coast in the state of Louisiana, we've been talking about hurricane preparedness. And so you can find that information at the website, noaa.gov/hurricane-prep. But there are 7 things that I like to mention here that everyone can do to get yourselves prepared, and you can get more information at the website mentioned. One is know and determine your risk. There are all sorts of resources out there that we provide at the National Weather Service, that the Hurricane Center provides, and other places as well, FEMA, where you can see if you're in a flood-prone area. You can see what storm surge can do with different strengths of storms for your area, depending on where you are close to the coast there. Develop that evacuation plan. Now is the time for that. Gather disaster supplies. As the governor mentioned, it can be a slow process. You may not be able to do it all at once, but if you gather just a little bit over the course of the next few weeks and a few months, should that storm appear off in the horizon, you'll be ready to go. One of the items is doing an insurance checkup. Just kind of make sure that you're set up moving forward as the storm season starts. Another thing, too, is to strengthen and secure your home. As the governor mentioned, a lot of homes may be in a position which they'd be a little bit weakened from the last couple of seasons. But now is a good time to go back over, make sure that everything's in place as best as possible to secure your home and make sure it's prepped for the upcoming season. And a couple other items is, one, help your neighbors. A lot of folks may be in a little bit worse off position than you, and now's a good time to maybe pitch in a little bit to make sure that your neighbors that are ready to go for the season as well. And then the last thing is, as you finalize your hurricane plan, put it in writing. Share it with relatives. Share it so that people will know maybe where you're going if you do evacuate, so that way you have a full understanding of how you're going to take care of your pets, to make sure that you have everything taken care of when it comes to your medical needs, et cetera, and you have those supplies ready. It's a really good idea to put that in writing, because plans put in writing are plans that usually get followed more than ones that we just think about or we talk about. So with that, I hope everybody will prepare for the upcoming season. I hope we don't have to experience anything like we've experienced in the last 2 years. And with that, I'll turn it back over to the governor.
Good morning. Marquita Walters, Secretary of the Department of Children and Family Services. And as the governor mentioned, preparedness is the key. The time you spend now getting ready will go a long, long way should an event happen. So important things for you to know about sheltering is knowing where you're going to go. Make your plan now for where you will go to shelter. If you're planning on evacuating and you have a family member that you're going to, make sure you know the route you're going to take and how you're going to get there. Make sure you have all their information so you can call them along the way if you need to. If you know that you're going to go to a shelter, check with your local officials ahead of time to find out where those shelters will be open. We start with local shelters first before we open state shelters. So your local community is going to know what they're going to open and when. We will be using congregate sheltering again this year. So if you want to have your mask ready or have all your a special face covering that you like, then get that ready. Put that in your plan. Be sure you have all your medications with you so that when the time comes, you're ready to go. If you need to evacuate and you don't have transportation, check in with your local emergency preparedness office to find out what they offer. The state will help do that when necessary. But remember, all disasters start local. So your local emergency preparedness office is your first stop. And as Casey said, going to get a game plan is the best way, where everything's organized for you and it's all laid out there. This year, if we should have a storm, which we all hope and pray that we don't, Louisiana is a Dsnap state. We are used to having the disaster food response after a storm hits. That's a complicated program, and people always get confused and wonder, am I eligible for that? Should I apply for that? Well, we have come up with a Dsnap Estimator that we will be unveiling this year, that you will actually be able to go online and put in. It's really quick. I did it yesterday. It asks for your income. It asks for how much you spent on your storm preparedness, and a couple of things, 4 questions. And then it will calculate for you if you might be eligible. It is not saying you are eligible. It is a calculator to give you an estimate. So it isn't, if you do that, it's not saying, oh, I already did it. You still have to go and apply online. It's really good to pre-register. We always encourage people to pre-register. And so the estimator itself is, you can get to it a couple of different ways. I'll give you a couple. dcfs.louisiana.gov/dsnap or dcfs.la.gov/dsnap-estimator. So you can go and try it now. See how it works so that you'll know what to do. And remember, Dsnap is a federal program. Rules change periodically, and so we will run the program the way we are given the guidance. We can't tell you now where or when there will be a Dsnap, because all of that happens after a storm in partnership with the feds as we determine all of the things that have to be in place for that benefit to be triggered for the public. So we are ready and excited about this. We hope it'll tone down some of the confusion around the issue, and just encourage you to go try it out. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. As the governor mentioned, our COVID numbers look really well currently. But although we're looking really well and our statewide percentage positivity is where it needs to be at 1.7%, and our hospitalizations are really low, lower than they've been in quite some time. So when we think about the 68 COVID hospitalizations that we reported yesterday in comparison to where we were mid-January, more than 2,300 individuals COVID positive hospitalized. We've made tremendous progress in our state. And while we're all very excited about that, while we're planning for our hurricane season, we must take into account that may not be where the numbers are when it comes time to it. So it's really important that people plan ahead of time. When you're thinking about your game plan, your family, your friends, think about who's in your household or where you may possibly evacuate. If you're going to be evacuating with loved ones, friends, who's in their household? Do they have vulnerable individuals? Do you have a vulnerable individual in your family? Are they vaccinated? Do they need their booster? And so remembering where we are and what's the season, we have to be prepared ahead of time. Also thinking about in terms of prescriptions, what are those medical needs, and making sure we get those things filled ahead of time. Do you have someone in your family that requires oxygen? What's going to be the plan if the power goes out? So making sure we capture that information on the front end so we can be prepared is going to be extremely helpful. I also want to mention in terms of the governor hit upon our boosters. And so just a reminder, if you're 50 and above, you are eligible for your next booster. If you're an individual or a loved one is 12 years or older and has moderate to severe immunocompromise, they are eligible for their booster. And so we need to make sure we're keeping up to date in terms of our boosters, especially as we're moving forward in the season, and we'll likely be staying with friends and family. I know no one is excited about hurricane season. I'm not excited. But one thing that I do know when we are here in Louisiana, in hurricane season, we come together. And this is the time for us to reach out to others to make sure they have their plan, they're on top of what they need, and making sure we're able to move forward as needed in this hurricane season. So it's really important that you check in, you know what you need, and you have what your family needs. And so understanding your healthcare needs on the front end will save us time when it's time to move very quickly in the hurricane season. So thank you.
Thank you, Governor. Sean Wilson, Secretary for the Department of Transportation and Development. Unfortunately, we are very familiar with the number of storms and how to respond, as the Governor discussed, the number of events, whether they were named or unnamed events, that we had to respond to. And DOTD is on the forefront of helping ensure that you are safe as you travel. Given the uncertainty of future events, now is the time to make not just your game plan, but your actual roadmap on how you will move to your safe destination. You know, during the 2021 season, we evacuated over 600,000 people in a 3-day period. And fortunately, it was done relatively safely. The reality is congested roads will become a challenge whenever we evacuate the state of Louisiana, either in regions or in smaller communities because of the capacity on the highways. Most importantly, I'm very proud of the work that this administration has been able to do to create construction zones. Those construction zones will also hamper your potential evacuation routes, which is why it's important for you to take time in advance of a storm today to look at 511la.org to understand how it works, to create awareness for you and the traveling members of your family. You can use it as a website, you can use it as a phone number, and you can use it on your phone, but please familiarize yourself with that. On that app, you will see us provide information like construction zones, standing water on roadways, road closures for other reasons, and that's an important factor to determine how are you going to get to Mississippi or Texas or Arkansas or wherever you may be evacuating to. We know the numbers increased tremendously on 511 during an event, and so we are prepared and are sustaining that system to be able to provide you that information. Additionally, along those evacuation routes, we have digital message boards that will provide information. And so we will flash information as far as Baton Rouge to talk about what's going to happen in Lafayette, or at the Mississippi line to talk about what's happening in New Orleans. So please, please pay attention to those message boards. The other tool that's super important for you during your evacuation planning and implementation is paying attention to the live stream cameras that we have on our websites. Those pieces of technology will provide you a visual of what's happening in real time on your route so that you can prepare and expect to see congested delays if we're evacuating, which is why you never wait until the very last minute to evacuate. The earlier you get out, the more easily you will be able to move and be patient in that process. A number of our accidents are created as a result of impaired driving, distracted driving, and during a disaster, frustrated drivers. So please be patient as you evacuate to recognize that you have something in common with the other thousands of people on the road at the same time, and that has to be getting to a safe place in advance of hurricane landfall. Rest assured that the department has its resources already aligned and pre-positioned to mobilize bus contracts as well as motor assist patrol across our system to help travelers when they travel, and recognize that we will implement that as we have in the past and trust that we'll do it very, very safely. And so with that, 511la.org is the place to go to learn about the evacuation routes and understand that you need to have your car loaded with fuel or a fully charged battery and have plans to stop along the way. And as Ben said, make sure you have cash to be able to get gas in case the digital systems aren't working in an event. So thank you, Governor, for the opportunity to talk about evacuating during a storm or in advance of a storm.
Butch Browning, State Fire Marshal. Governor, thank you for your leadership in protection, preparing, and response for our citizens during these times of emergencies. And you're exactly right. We have some big concerns of the dangers of carbon monoxide as we plan for hopefully no storms, but inform our citizens on how to react. And I guess I want to make 3 important points. The most important point is if you plan to have a generator, if you have one now or plan to get one, now's the time to purchase that generator and purchase it appropriately. most people turn to portable generators. It's very important that that generator is sized for the type of things that you're going to use. You never backfeed that generator into the home electrical service. That should only be connected by professionals. So it means you're using extension cords. Make sure you have the appropriate type of outdoor extension cords and the appropriate length of extension cords. You know, these generators should not be around 20 feet closer to the home, so you need to get them way away from your home. They don't need to be around cracks where carbon monoxide gas can leak into your home. So we're talking about windows, doors, things of that nature. Now, refueling these generators are very dangerous. We actually had a lot of burn injuries that occurred, not injuries from carbon monoxide, but people who were burned because in refueling this generator, the vapors of the gasoline ignited. So a real simple step of a 20-minute cool down that you let that generator sit, you let it rest, then you refuel it and use it. Now, many people have turned to the in-home generators, and as the governor said, certainly in Hurricane Ida, we documented a tremendous amount of carbon monoxide poisonings from generators that a homeowner ultimately thought was safe, when in fact those generators may not have been installed to the manufacturer's specifications. So right now, if you have these generators or you're thinking about getting them, now would be the time to have them inspected by a professional person. In addition to that, have the appropriate supplies. You know, these generators require rest time over long periods of time. We had folks in South Louisiana that were out of power for weeks. Those generators require oil changes. They require servicing. Now's the time to do that. So that's the most important point that we want to give to you today is if you're going to use them, prepare for them and use them quickly and safely and properly. The second point, it's a call now upon the people who provide these services, our retail stores, our hardware stores, our home stores. Now's the time for them to put in the main aisles of their aisles of hurricane preparedness, making sure people have carbon monoxide alarms, making people have the proper equipment, making sure they understand the right generators that they do. So the third and final piece, I think, is the carbon monoxide alarm. And, you know, if you don't have a carbon monoxide alarm in your home today, your family may already be in danger because we know carbon monoxide poisoning exists in other situations besides the lethal exhaust of a generator. So now's the time to install a carbon monoxide alarm in your home, having it ready and knowing what to do when that alarm goes off. You'll find, depending on your safety model in your home, you can actually buy today combination alarms that not only do smoke from a fire, but the vapors from a carbon monoxide poisoning. So again, we ask that you plan for using a generator now. The appropriate time to plan is now, not once your power goes out and you're scrambling to find provisions to make this generator work. Thank you, Governor.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it, Ben and Marquita and Courtney and Sean and Butch. Also with us today is Colonel Lamar Davis from the State Police, and we appreciate him. And of course, State Police does a tremendous job in keeping people safe out on the highway, but also responding to all of the different things that happen during a disaster, including calls for assistance. And one thing that I was reminded of as Marquita was speaking a while ago is over the last few storms, we've actually had instances where family members couldn't get in contact with someone, and so they would call us to have first responders who were extremely busy go to the homes of their relatives, and we find out that the relatives that they were worried about had evacuated. It's just the people didn't know. And so we're using people's very valuable time, and in some cases putting them in danger because we're trying to respond before the weather actually makes it safe to do so for someone who's been evacuated. So please make sure your family knows what you're going to do. And when you execute your plan, make sure they know that you executed it, because at some point it is possible, and this has happened after the most recent storms, that we lose cell towers and you're not going to be able to communicate after the fact. So as you leave, let them know. We also have a FEMA represented here today by John Long, and our federal partners are very important as we prepare for and respond to and recover from hurricanes as well. FEMA basically is embedded here at GOSEP all the time. But I did want you all to know that last week I had an opportunity to meet with the colonel in charge of the New Orleans district for the Corps of Engineers, as well as the captain for the U.S. Coast Guard, who operates out of New Orleans as well. And we were able to coordinate things related to hurricanes. All right, so to wrap it up, we're 28 days out. The time is now to get prepared. and the team here has given you a lot of information, a lot of things that you can be doing. Please don't wait. Prepare as early as possible. And I would remind everybody that while we can all agree that August, September timeframe is when we see most storms and when they're the strongest, we went into hurricane season just a couple of years ago and actually had one come to Louisiana right at the outset of the season. So hurricane season starts in June for a reason, and let's get prepared in May because that's the best thing to do. So with that, I will take any questions you might have. And you feel free to direct a question to anyone who's up here as well.
What changes do you think people need to make for hurricane season this year?
I'm sorry, what changes? Yeah, the changes you need to make are really dictated by your circumstances. How have your circumstances changed? What is your family situation right now? I mentioned it a while ago. Do you have relatives living with you because their homes were destroyed? Have you had another baby? Do you have additional pets? Are you living in a trailer? Or is your home already damaged to the point and hasn't been repaired to the point where you shouldn't stay home, even if you might have been tempted to do so in previous storms based on the destructive nature that we've been told to expect? So really the changes are dictated by people's personal situations, as I just mentioned, but also the changing nature of how and where these storms develop and the rapid intensification that they undergo as they're literally at our doorstep at the time that the Weather Service and the Hurricane Center says, yes, this is going to be a Category 4 hurricane. And as maybe 12 hours before that, it was supposed to be a 1. Or maybe a 2. And then all of a sudden everything changes. And by the way, people should know a slow-moving Hurricane 1 can be every bit as destructive as a much stronger hurricane, because the slower it moves, the more rain it's going to dump, the longer the wind is going to pound any structure out there, even though the wind speeds may not be as high. But if you have, 5 times as long to deal with the slower winds, they can be every bit as destructive as a hurricane that moves faster. So all of these things need to be taken into consideration, along with the fact that we still are in a COVID environment, and people really need to remain up to date on their vaccinations so that they protect themselves and those that they're going to be in close contact with in the immediate aftermath of a storm. Anything else? Yes, ma'am.
This might be a better question for Secretary Phillips. I'm not sure. A lot of the changes that are going to be made to the nursing home evacuation policy are going to be coming over the next year, at least judging by the legislation that's moving. And so I'm wondering if someone could speak to being confident that nursing home evacuations will be safe, given what happened last year.
Yeah, and I'm gonna ask Dr. Phillips to respond to that in detail. I actually had an opportunity this week to address the overwhelming majority of nursing home owners, and by the way, all of whom their evacuations went as planned and were extremely effective and safe, and so forth, even during Hurricane Ida and the year before that as well. But we as a state are absolutely determined to make sure that what happened actually in my home parish of Tangipahoa Parish last year never happens again. This is something that we're approaching not just with the nursing home owners and the association, but also with the legislature and the legislation that you just talked about. And one of the things that I will mention is, just like as a family prepares for evacuation, once you start that plan, you may realize it's no longer viable because the place you were evacuating to has also been damaged to the point where you can't stay. And that can happen to a nursing home evacuation as well. And so your plan ahead of time may have been a great plan that would have passed muster with anyone who was looking at it, and so forth. But during the course of the storm, you may have to call an audible, and you may require assistance. And so I'm asking all those nursing home owners, if that happens, to come online, let us know, and then we have access to resources that can help you find alternative locations for your residents, line up the transportation, medical care that might become necessary, nutrition that might be necessary as well. So there's an awful lot of work that's going into this right now. There is legislation that's moving through the session, and to the extent that she's able, I'll ask Courtney to come up and go through that with you now.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for that question, Julie. You're right. Several bills are going through this current legislative process, but that doesn't mean we have to wait until that process is finalized. So as you're aware, but just for the public's knowledge, we are currently reviewing the 98 plans that we've received from nursing homes from the 22 parishes that are currently required in statute. Doing those reviews have sent some information back to some of the nursing homes because we needed additional information. So we're currently in that review process. One thing that we will do a little bit differently this year, even though the legislation has not passed yet, is that our team will be going out this month to some of those entities that plan to evacuate to a non-licensed site, so to a non-licensed nursing home site. We'll be going out ahead of time this month. We will also make sure we go out when they pull the trigger and notify us that they may potentially be moving to this site a couple of days prior to the storm. We will do a follow-up visit to that site so we can see what is actually happening once it's set up. It's one thing to do a review in an empty building. It's another thing to do a review once it's set up. So we do intend to implement that this year going forward. I will say one thing that we do probably should mention, and for the public who's watching, if you do have a loved one who's in a facility, this is the time now to plan ahead. If you plan on taking your loved one with you in that evacuation process, notify the nursing home. Ask them what's that process, what you need to do ahead of time. If you plan on having your loved one reside and evacuate with the nursing home, if they do tend to evacuate, understand what their plan is. Where will they go? What's their primary evacuation site? What is their secondary evacuation site? What's their contact information? That's one of the things that we learned this go round, that sometimes loved ones did not know where their loved ones were evacuating. And so making sure that information is known on the front end. But we do tend to go a little bit further out. Again, what happened last year at the Independence site cannot happen again. And we're committed to working with all of our partners and stakeholders to make sure that does not happen in our state ever again.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Sure.
So I know, Mr. Dean's nursing homes are offline, right? So I'm assuming that has, that capacity, it sounds like from what I've heard, has been absorbed. Is that going to make it harder for people to evacuate to other nursing homes because we have fewer beds in other nursing homes?
We still have capacity in nursing homes, but again, we do have some entities, and the review is not complete yet of those 98 facilities that did submit their summaries. Some of them do have as their primary site or secondary site some unlicensed nursing homes facilities. That's why we have to actually go put eyes on these buildings to see what they are, where they are, and to make sure that they are up to what they need to be for an evacuation site. So that's in the progress right now to make sure we do have the capacity in our state. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Seeing none, thank you all for coming out and covering this very important topic. And I'm aware that we talk about hurricanes in Louisiana so much that quite often this just kind of goes right over people's heads. They're not focused on it. But based on our experience here in the last couple of years in particular, I'm imploring everyone out there to take this season seriously. You just got an update from the National Weather Service, and they expect an above average season this year in terms of the number of storms and the intensity of those storms. And we've had too much of that in the last couple of years. So let's make sure that we're all prepared. We're going to do everything we can at the state level to be ready. We need you to do your part to be ready. And while we always intend to provide assistance as soon as possible, understand that we're asking you to be prepared to go 72 hours before help arrives at your doorstep in the event that you're still inside your home, and maybe you shouldn't be. Maybe you should be evacuated. But this could be a flash flood. It could be a different type of natural disaster too. And so the first 72 is on you. And that is something that obviously we're going to try to make sure that we're faster than that, and all of your local first responders. Finally, as a weather system approaches, pay attention to the National Weather Service, pay attention to your local stations, TV stations, radio stations for news, weather updates, and then heed those warnings and what you're told by your local officials, because that is how you're going to stay safe. So thank you all very much, and I'll always end with this. While we prepare for the worst, let's make sure we're praying for the best. Thank you all, and God bless. Okay.